Start by opening a new AutoCAD template. Remove any grid. Set your units to architectural. And set your limits to 200 feet by 200 feet, something large enough to accept the 1-point grid. Create layers for the ground, for the horizon line, for a vanishing point, which will lock once we place the point, room boundaries, and grid lines. Set the colors to each of the layers to different colors so that you can see them clearly. Set the line weight for the room boundary lines to 0.5 millimeters. Leave the rest of the layers as a default. Start by making a ground line. I'm going to make mine 100 feet long. Next, we'll make our horizon line and set the horizon line at an appropriate height for eye height. I'm using 5 feet. Put the horizon line on the horizon line layer. Switch to the room boundary layer and create a room boundary that matches the project that you're working on. I'm going to set my room boundary to 9-foot tall walls and 24-foot wide wall. Place your vanishing point somewhere along the horizon line. Preferably match that to the location you've tested in your project. Place the vanishing point on the vanishing point layer and lock it. I used DDP type to change the point style. Switch to the grid layer and using the ray command, draw lines at each of the corners of the room. Trim those lines. And that these are boundaries of the room, they should be placed on the room boundary layer. You can use the divide or measure command to create points spaced evenly across the edge of the room. I'm going to use measure, select the floor line, and set the measurement to 1 foot. This places a point at 1 foot increments. Use the ray command to place points in the center of each one of the nodes, and then trim. Use measure to divide the vertical line. Use the ray command to go through each one of those points. trim. Repeat that process for the other two edges of the wall. Using the ray command to go through each one of those new points. Use trim to trim the arrayed lines, making sure that you don't trim your horizon line. To create depth, we're going to create a new diagonal measuring point that's measured 30 feet from the vanishing point. Using that diagonal measuring point, create a ray that goes from it to the corner of the room. Everywhere the diagonal line crosses the measured lines that you have arraying from the vanishing point, create a horizontal infinite line using X line. Trim the X lines to the edge of the boundary. Now we have a grid on the floor. To adjust the size of the nodes, use DDP type and set the size to absolute units and change the point size to 2. Now we'll create the grid on the side walls, the ceiling, and the other wall. We're going to repeat that process, or we can copy the lines and use a series of trim and extend commands. Extend the lines you copied to the top boundary edge. Repeat that process for the other two sides. Here I'm extending the last side of the copied lines. So now the room is completely gridded and we're ready to set it up in layout. Go to the Layout tab and then open the properties for the sheet setup, page setup manager. Modify, change the printer plotter to AEDP2, which is the copier you'll use to print this out at C size, architectural C, landscape. You can go ahead and leave this in color. Extend the viewports and adjust the scale so that your grid is at a measured scale that you can use. I'm going to try 1/4 inch first. I think that's a little bit too small, so I'm going to switch to 1/2 inch. And that's cropping this space nicely. And now you're ready to print. Make sure when you print you're able to see the vanishing point so that you can reuse it when you're using the grid.